Hi, welcome to this technical overview of what's in IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.3. 8.1.3 announced on September 26 and GA'd on September 29, 2017. 8.1.3 is only for the Spectrum Protect server and operations center, and these are the new features that I'll be going over in this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. The first is tiering to cloud. And what tiering to cloud does is it allows you to exert greater control over where the data is stored so that it's a better balance of both performance and cost benefits for your different tiers of storage. If you're backing up data to the directory containers, then it will be rapidly ingested, deduped, and then optionally compressed and encrypted directly on high-speed disk. And then you can choose how long to leave it on that disk before you tier that data out to a cloud storage pool. And this cloud storage pool could be your Microsoft Azure, IBM Cloud Object Storage, or your Amazon S3. And so this gives you a way to differentiate operational versus long-term data, and it also gives you a great place to place compliance data that needs different retention periods and is a good fit for that long-term storage in the cloud. When the end user goes to restore the data, it doesn't matter if that data is sitting on disk or cloud, it's simply restored back to its original location. I do have a YouTube out there that does show a demonstration of setting this up, so do take a look at that. Inside of the Operations Center, you're simply going to go into Storage and then into the new Tiering Rules section. And there, if you click on the plus Create Rules, it'll bring up this wizard. And you're going to be prompted for which Spectrum Protect server you're creating the rule for. And that's if you have multiple Spectrum Protect servers in your environment. What your target pool in the cloud is, and it'll automatically bring up possible cloud pools that are already defined. And then the source pool for any of the directory containers that exist out in your Spectrum Protect server. You'll give that rule a name. You'll determine after how many days you want to move that data out to the target pool, and then at what time of the day you want to start that move rule at. And then you can determine how long that move will actually occur before we stop that process, because we don't want to interfere with any backups or anything like that that might be occurring to the cloud. Once that rule has been set up and it's run for a while, you can go into the Operations Center storage tiering rules and take a look at the details of that rule. And it'll show you how much data has been moved over the last 2 weeks. And it'll be a comparison of the data that was actually available to be moved, that would be the dark blue, versus the light blue line here, which would be the data that was actually moved. And so there may be a discrepancy between this dark blue and light blue line if we didn't have enough time to complete that move as allocated in your rule. We also have a speed over the last 2 weeks, and this will show you the throughput that we had when we were moving it out to the cloud. If you did want to set this up with a command line, this is the command line you'd use, the define STG rule. Some things to notice here is the target storage pool is either a on or off-premise cloud pool, which can either be S3 or Azure. Now, if you are setting up a cloud pool just for tiering, you don't have to add a accelerator hybrid cache to that. And so now when you do go through the setup rules in the cloud directory pools, you will now have an option to add or not add an accelerator cache. So if it's only for tiering, you don't have to have that accelerator cache. But if you are doing backups directly to that cloud as well, then you still will need that accelerator cache. The source pool is obviously one or more of your directory container pools. The action type in this version is always going to be tier. And the tier delay is how many days that object is going to stay in the source pool before being tiered out. This max process will become important when we look at the number of processes that are kicked off for each storage pool. And the duration is going to be how long that daily tier process should run and at what time it should start. So before tiering, if you did a query occupancy, you would see this file space and the storage pool name, and then the number of files and the amount of space that's out there. Once the tiering kicks off, we will first start a parent process for each of the storage pools. It will go out and it'll look for either nodes or file space pairs that are eligible to be tiered. And then it'll go ahead and batch those together in objects, and those will be about a maximum size of 50 megabytes. And then it'll put them in the queue. Once things have been queued up, then we kick off child processes. And we're going to have one child process for each object batch that's queued up by the parent processes. And the maximum number of child processes we'll have is going to be the max process that you defined when you set up the tiering. And what that means then is that for one parent process per source pool, there could be up to the number of max processes times the number of source pools, and that would be how many child processes you could end up with. When tiering ends, you will first of all see that annotated in your activity log, and we'll see here that this ANR 383I, the tier storage pool process from the cloud container storage pool, has completed, and it'll give you the statistics. And then down below, if we did the query occupancy again, you can now see that that data now resides out on the S3 pool. So if you remember before tiering, the data resided out on the directory container dir pool 2. And then after the end of tiering, you'll see that we're now out on the S3 cloud pool instead of the original directory container pool that the other query occupancy showed. When we tier the object out to the cloud, we will copy all of the dedupe extents needed to recreate that object if those extents are not yet present in the cloud storage pool. We will also leave a copy of those extents on the directory container until there are no other dedupe objects referencing them in the directory container pool. When you are setting up tiering to cloud, if you have encryption set to yes on the source, we'll leave that encrypted when we tier it out to the target, regardless of the target settings. If you have encryption set to no, the only time we would go ahead and encrypt that is if your target pool does have encryption set to yes, and we would do that encryption during the tiering process. Likewise, with compression, if the data is already compressed on the source, we will keep it compressed regardless of what the target storage pool is set to. However, if your compression is set to no on the source but yes on the target, we will also compress that during tiering. One other consideration is if you are utilizing backups of things like Windows system states or data protection modules, for instance, for your databases, a lot of those types of programs actually take full backups that have either dependent incrementals or differential backups with it. When we do the tier to cloud, we're actually going to migrate those fulls plus incrementals and differentials together as a group. And we're going to base that eligibility on the oldest object in that group. And usually that oldest object is going to be the full backup. So for instance, if you had an Oracle backup with Spectrum Protect for databases that was doing weekly fulls plus daily differentials, and you had a tier delay that was set to 4 days, then on day 1, your full backup would not be tiered. On day 2, your differential would also not be tiered. Day 3, your differential wouldn't be tiered. Day 4, we would now tier your full plus all of the objects associated with, which would be those 3 differentials, days 2, 3, and 4s, out to the cloud. And on day 5 and day 6, we would also immediately tier those differentials out to the cloud. Now on day 7, when that full backup occurred again, then we would start the countdown again to 4 days. So if you are looking at this type of grouped together objects, once again, this is going to be things like database backups, mail backups, or system states. This does not include things like your Spectrum Protect incremental forever backups. Then you want to take into consideration this grouping when you set up your schedules. So it's possible that you might want to set up any of the data that is recovery time objective is very sensitive. For instance, an Oracle or an SQL database backup, and you might want to make that only move to the cloud after 8 days. Versus if you had recovery time insensitive compliance files, for instance, archives or weekly fulls or monthly fulls, that you would want to move almost immediately out to the cloud because it doesn't, the chances of us needing to restore that is probably very low. And even if we did need to restore it, the recovery time objective is also very low. Another way that you can set this up with the different types of data is for recovery time objective sensitive data, like maybe an incremental forevers of your file systems, you might choose to keep those on a directory container storage pool and not tier them out to a cloud storage pool, versus your fulls and incrementals that occur for a database backup. Perhaps once a week, every 8 days, you would migrate them out, and then they would be migrated as a set where you had your fulls plus all the dependent differentials being tiered out to the cloud. And then for recovery time insensitive data, you might decide to tier those out just after a day or so of being written to the directory container. Another thing to look at when you start talking about tiering data out to the cloud is how are you going to deal with replication as well. And so taking that previous example, with the incremental forevers, we may choose not to cloud tier them and then to use the Protect storage pool and node replication to make sure that they're protected. We have a disaster recovery copy over on a second Spectrum Protect server. So this is assuming that your incremental forevers are recovery time objective sensitive data, versus your database and mail backup, which were the second example in the previous slide. We would go ahead and replicate those over to another Spectrum Protect server, but that would have a dissimilar policy, and it wouldn't be keeping those replicated files as long or as many versions on the replicated server. We would then tier the older data 8+ days out to our cloud storage pool. And then using the third example in the previous slide, you would have no Protect storage pool or node replication for this recovery time insensitive data, but you would tier it out to the cloud rapidly, approximately every day. You would tier it out to the cloud. So you do want to give some thought to how you set up your daily cycle for your Spectrum Protect server when it's doing these different types of operations. And so maybe you dedicate your first 8 hours of the cycle to the backup and archives. And then the next 8 hours would be looking at doing your Protect storage pools, node replications, and your tiering. And you would need to stagger those so that your Protect storage pool and node replication of your first recovery time sensitive data occurred first. And at that same time, you could have the tiering of the insensitive data occurring. Protect storage pool of your second disk storage pool occurring, following that with the node replication and the tiering occurring at the same time. And then the rest of the day would be filled with expiration, your Spectrum Protect database backup, and then a couple spare hours as buffers in case restores or other operations had interrupted the cycle. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next new feature, and this would be the Operations Center's integration of the automatic client deployment. In 8.1.2, the last version, we did offer automatic deployment via the command line. And in 8.1.3, what we've done is we've integrated those automatic updates into the Operations Center, so it becomes very simple to set up with the wizards that the Operations Center provides. And the Operations Center will also run underneath the covers the things like the download of the client updates, as well as showing you which client updates are available. It'll easily allow you to select a maintenance level to be distributed to the existing clients in your environment. It will create those schedules for you to do that distribution. And then once the distribution is done, it'll summarize all of the distribution status for you. If an update were to fail, it's easy to redeploy that. Or if you want to cancel an update, it's also easy to cancel those from the Operations Center. In order to be eligible for automatic client updates, your backup archive clients need to be at version 6.43 up to version 8.1.2. You have to have your client acceptor daemon running with a scheduler, and it requires a minimum of some free disk on the clients because we will be sending them the upgrade package to install. You also have to have password access set to generate, and this is not for greenfield installs, cluster node deployment, Spectrum Protect 4 products, HSM, storage agents, nor can you do downgrades or initial configurations or modifications. There is a tech talk out there, and here's the link to that. And I've also created a YouTube if you want to see me demo this in the Operations Center. Moving on to slide 19. So the steps that we go through for this OC client deployment setup is we first of all configure the Protect server for client deployment. Then we download the client packages from the client maintenance site and place them into the Spectrum Protect server. Next, we make those archive packages available into the server storage pool via an import process. The administrator then can select the clients they want to update and when they want the updates to occur. And the Operations Center will create the needed schedules to do that. And when the specified schedule runs, the client will retrieve the package from the Spectrum Protect server and do the install. And once the install is complete, it'll then send its results back to the Spectrum Protect server where the administrator could view the deployment results. So let's take a look at how that looks in the Operations Center. In order to turn on the automatic client updates, you can simply go in either to the Operations Center Updates Clients, and the first time it'll take you to the Settings page, or you can simply go into the Operations Center Settings Updates, and you would access that via this little gear-looking icon up on the top bar of the Operations Center. You'll want to slide over this Enable Client Updates button. The administrator does need to provide a directory for the update packages, and this needs to be 40 gigabytes in size. And for this directory, it can't be used by any of the other directory containers or Spectrum Protect databases or logs. They will then need to specify how many update packages they want to retain for each available product version. They can either do just the most recent, the 2 most recent, 3 most recent, or the 4 most recent updates. Once that schedule has been set, that Spectrum Protect hub server will go out and download the deploy packages as well as the update packages from the IBM website. It will place them into that directory and then it will import them into the hub server. If you go into the hub server's completed task, you'll actually see those import nodes occurring. You'll also see a replicate node occur where we replicate the needed packages over to the spoke servers so that they too can update their clients. Next, the administrator will need to select the clients that they want to update and to which version. When you go into the update screen into clients, it will show you the versions that your Spectrum Protect clients currently have installed. And then below that, it will show the versions that are available to update to. So in this case, we have some version 8.1 clients, probably 8.11, that are eligible to be updated to 8.12. And in this case, we actually have 3,101 clients who would be candidate for that upgrade. Now, this next screen on page 23 is just a mock-up. There's no true version 8.199 out there yet. If you do have multiple sub-versions available for your primary versions, they will both show up in the bottom here. So for instance, if we had a version 8.1 and it was able to update to either version 8.12 or this made-up 8.199 version, this is what it would look like. You could then choose which version you wanted to update to. Likewise, you can click on version 7.1 and update those specific clients to version 7.18. So when you do choose this schedule update blue box here, it'll pop up a wizard and it will have you select which clients you want to schedule for the updates. You can select either a single client or multiple clients. They don't have to be consecutive here. You can utilize a control click to choose one client versus a shift click to choose multiple consecutive clients for scheduling. You do want to pay attention to the last scheduled start date that'll show up, because when you set your schedule time, you want that to be after the schedules have completed. We will give a 2-hour grace period where we'll queue the update schedule for 2 hours, waiting for the backup to complete. But if it doesn't complete prior to those 2 hours, we will mark the update schedule as missed. Once those are scheduled, if you go into Updates Scheduled, we will see an individual schedule for each of the clients that you chose. You will see what time they are estimated to kick off at, if any are currently running, and if any succeeded or failed. Also from this screen, you can choose to either cancel the updates or reschedule any missed updates. A couple things to be aware of when you set up the client deployment. Because the hub server allows you to download the update and deploy files and then distribute those to the spoke servers, you do need to make sure that communication is set up between the hub and spoke servers. So from the hub server, you do want to issue a query server and make sure that you see the spoke server. And then likewise from the spoke server, you want to issue a query server and make sure you have the hub server's definitions. And if you don't, you want to issue this define server, the hub server's name, the server password, high-level address, low-level address. You also want to make sure that the hub and spoke server have exchanged SSL 1.2 certificates. And the easiest way to do this is to issue a ping server and then the spoke server name, and you would issue that from the hub server. One thing to note is that when you set up spoke servers using the plus spoke wizard inside the operations center, the hub server will receive the spoke server's definitions, but not vice versa. And that's why you might have to go through these define server steps. In order to do both the tiering and the client deployment, we do utilize our REST API. This REST API manages the operations for the operations center's client deployment processes as well as tiering processes. This REST API is embedded into the Spectrum Protect server process. It's not a standalone service, and it runs on the hub server only. It does not run on the spoke servers. You do need to make sure that your REST HTTP port is open, and by default that's 8443. You can customize that if you want. When the hub operations center is first installed, it does set up a monitoring ID called IBM OC whatever the hub server name is. And it's this monitoring ID that's going to be working with the REST API. If you do a query monitoring settings, you can verify that the monitoring status is set on and the monitoring admin's name. And if for some reason that monitor had been turned off, you can do a set status monitor on to turn the monitor back on. In order to do the Operations Center automatic client deployments, both the hub and any of your spoke servers need to be at version 8.1.3 or above. The hub server requires that repository of 40 gigabytes of directory space. That does need to be writable by the server instance. When you turn on client updates on the hub server, it will go through and take that directory space and automatically underneath the covers create a file dev class and storage pool that we're going to utilize for storing these updates. We'll create this device class of IBM deploy client import and the storage pool of IBM deploy client pool. If you do want to make sure that none of the imports or replication processes for any package level failed, you would also go into the hub completed task panel. Now this is a slightly different approach than we had in 8.1.2 for the manual deployment, because in the manual deployment we had a separate directory location where we'd originally store the downloads, but in 8.1.3 we utilized that same directory as a file device class and the download directory. For the spoke servers in 8.1.3, if you do have spoke servers, and obviously it's not required, they first of all have to be at least at version 8.1.3. And under the covers, when the hub server contacts them to replicate over these update packages, it will choose one of the archive storage pools to utilize, and that would either be a file or container pool. It will look for the one with the most capacity, but at least has to have 10 gigabytes of free space. You could utilize the Operations Center policy panels to select a different storage pool if you didn't like the one that automatically got chosen. And once the hub server imports these updates, it will automatically replicate any applicable client updates over to the spoke server. The hub server is connecting automatically out to this IBM client maintenance site. And it does this when you first set up the Spectrum Protect automatic client imports, And then it runs automatically around 8 o'clock in the morning every day. So it'll go out there about every 24 hours to look for any new updates. And these would be updates to both the deploy packages as well as the update packages. And if you'll recall from my version 8.1.2 presentation, I talked about how we separate the deploy packages from the update packages so that the two of them work together ultimately to update the client. If we don't have to update, for instance, the deploy package, there's no reason to re-download it. When the hub server contacts this website, and it will have to have firewall privileges to get out there, we look at this catalog.json and we process it by utilizing inside of Spectrum Protect a new manifest table. And this is under the covers. The end user doesn't have to worry about this server manifest table, but the manifest is going to keep track of which updates and deploy packages we already have. And then that'll compare it with the current catalog.json out on the maintenance site and determine what needs to be downloaded that day. We only download packages for which we have clients that can utilize them. So for instance, if you didn't have any Macintosh clients, we wouldn't download the Mac packages. Once we've placed the download into the repository directory that you set up, we'll then import them into the Spectrum Protect hub server and then replicate them over to the spoke servers. If for some reason the customer wanted to maintain their own website and catalog.json file, they could set that URL using the set option for client deploy catalog URL. They can also do this client deploy use local catalog if they always wanted the Spectrum Protect hub server to look on the local server inside of the instant directory /deploy config. If you use either of these options, you do have to maintain your own catalog.json file, as well as making sure that the deploy packages are present and the update packages. If you do not want a client to utilize auto deploy, obviously you don't have to select them from scheduling, but the client itself can also do this auto deploy no in its options file. And if you're worrying about these client updates rebooting the system, you would want to set auto deploy no reboot as the default on that client in its options file. When we import the client packages into the Spectrum Protect hub server, we group them together in 3 categories, and those are represented by some new node names, and that would be your IBM deploy _client _Mac, IBM deploy _client _Unix, and IBM deploy _client under Windows. Those will contain, for instance, all of the Windows clients or all of the AIX, Linux, HP, and Solaris clients. Now, when we replicate them over to the spoke server, we replicate at that level. So even if the spoke server just has AIX clients, we'll replicate over all the deploy _client _Unix files, and that would include the Solaris clients. When we're doing an install of the update packages, the platform will change to Deploy Manager. We did a query client or looked at it in the Operations Center. What happens underneath the covers is the client will actually retrieve the files from the Spectrum Protect archive pool that we've set up. It'll uninstall the client code and then reinstall the new level of code. When you're choosing which clients to schedule, like I said, you can use Control+ click to choose a single client or Shift+ click to choose multiple consecutive clients. You can also use the filters, or you can sort by clicking on the headers to choose which clients you want. Make sure you schedule it for after the backup completes, and we will queue for up to 2 hours before marking that update schedule as failed. We do not charge for the storage of the client update files, so those are excluded from the licensing. We do prune the packages, so any of the packages that are no longer referenced in the catalog, we'll remove them from the manifest table after 3 days, and then if we don't have a client that needs those levels, remove those packages from the actual archive pool within 15 days. The archive pool's retention period is met, and by default we set that to 365 days. Then the updates will also be expired from the archive pool then. So there is a chance that you might have to re-download that client package. As for the schedules, we retain those up to 14 days and then we delete them. So you might want to click this export to CSV in order to export the status of those schedules to a Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so that was the automatic update piece. Another requirement in 813 is that your cloud object storage needs to be at least at 3.8.3. So if you are using IBM Cloud Object Storage as either a on-premise or off-premise cloud, make sure it's been updated. We did verify with the IBM Cloud Object Storage public cloud that they are already at 3.9 plus. If you are at an older version, you risk seeing some of these errors in the activity log, this ANR 3715E, or in the FFDC log. And this is due to a compatibility issue with older IBM Cloud Object Storage and the newer Amazon SDK. In Spectrum Protect version 812, we made some updates to security enhancements. This was to keep Spectrum Protect secure by design. So in Spectrum Protect 812, we changed how the local credentials are going to be stored, as well as we did a product-wide adoption and exploitation of TLS 1.2. In Spectrum Protect 813, we added support for additional types of sessions with the TLS 1.2, as well as support for the exchange based on possession of required certificates. And now Spectrum Protect 813 will exchange the TLS 1.2 for most server-to-server sessions and storage agent-to-server sessions. On slide 36, I go through some of these changes. One thing to remember, if you are using self-signed certificates, you may be required to set the default certificate to the TSM server self-signed SHA key, and you can do that with this GSK8 command, and that's regardless if you're 812 or 813. For server-to-server sessions in 812, the server-to-server process sessions such as replication and protect storage pool, they automatically acquire certificates, but they had to be in transitional state in order to complete the exchange. In version 813 and the upcoming version 718, the sessions can dynamically acquire the certificates regardless if they're in this stricter transitional mode. When it comes to server-to-server sessions that use administrator or node credentials to authenticate, in 812, it was required that the certificates already be exchanged or that you manually exchange those certificates for things like virtual volume sessions or command routing sessions, which did not initiate a server-to-server session like ping server, or when you did export on a server-to-server basis. In version 813 and 718, these certificates are now obtained if they're not already possessed. However, the target server does not obtain the requester server. The requester only receives the target server certificate. So that'll be true for your virtual volume sessions, your command routing sessions, and your export sessions. When it came to storage agent certificates, in 812, you had to manually configure that. In 813 and 718, the storage agents will automatically exchange server certificates with their database server. The acquisition of the database server is going to be noted in the storage agent option file, which is dsmsta.opt. You'll see this new STA session security option, and that'll be updated dynamically following the acquisition of the certificate. Manual configuration is necessary for library client or library manager servers if the storage agents are contacting them, unless they are the same server as their database server. We do have some new Protect blueprints available, and this is going to be our version 3.2 blueprints. They've made some updates when it came to hardware upgrades for IBM Elastic Storage Server configurations. You'll see the Elastic Storage Server model GLS6 with IBM Spectrum Scale version 4.23. We also have hardware upgrades for the small and medium Storewise servers, where the V3700 systems are now replaced with the Storewise V5010. We also have the introduction of Supermicro Super Server technology for small, medium, and large Storewise systems. And a Supermicro Super Server reference is being provided in addition to a Lenovo server reference. And then we also have Microsoft Windows Server 2016 operating system recommendations if you are installing your IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1 or later on Microsoft Windows Server 2016 Standard Edition. And those blueprints are accessible on the web. You can either Google for IBM Spectrum Protect blueprints or go to this link here. Another change has to do with our licensing. We now offer a Cloud Object Storage tier license. This is helping clients bridge to the cloud and expand their data center, and it allows clients to consume their cloud via a utility model, which is pay for what you use. So it allows clients to leverage cloud efficiency and predictability. So the new offering is the IBM Spectrum Protect Suite Cloud Object Storage tier. This is similar to our IBM Spectrum Protect suite where we had a Protect tier option or an archive option. It is priced per terabyte, and that price is lower for data stored in the IBM Cloud Object Storage pools. This applies to your IBM Spectrum Protect suite back-end only if you're using either your on-premise IBM Cloud Object Storage or your public IBM Cloud Object Storage. The part number for that is going to be 5725-X05. On slide 40, I did want to mention an upcoming release of Spectrum Protect version 7.1.8, and you'll see that in October. The purpose of 7.1.8 is to refresh the 7.1 stream with the key security fixes that we've rolled into Spectrum Protect 8.1.2 and 8.1.3. So 7.1.8 is going to be functionally equivalent to 8.1.3 when it comes to certificate exchange and security fixes. You will see that your 7.1.8 servers will be able to exchange certificates with 8.1.2 and 8.1.3 servers, and your 7.1.8 updates for those clients will be available when you do your automatic client deployment. On slide 41, one correction from my Spectrum Protect 8.1.2 presentation is that when you utilize NDMP backup to containers for NetApp devices, we do support snapdiff incremental out to our container pools. So thank you very much for your time, and please check out the YouTube videos that demo using tiering and the automatic client updates.